I grew up in Berkshire County, a rather rural area in western Massachusetts. There are stretches of road that are surrounded by, quite literally, tens of miles of forest. At this time, I lived on the edge of a very, very large forest. Bears, coyotes, fisher cats, you name it, I've seen it slithering beyond those trees. It's an area where you leave your car and look behind you, only to see pairs of green eyes staring at you from the edge of the forest. I can't tell you how many times I've had that hair standing up on the back of your neck feeling. It's eerie, but you become used to the fact that you live in their territory, not the other way around. One night a few summers back, I was driving back from a friend's house between 1 and 2 a.m. She lives in the middle of nowhere, with miles between houses. I took my usual route, one that takes me beneath a canopy of trees that lasts for about 3/4 of a mile. Even during the day, this part of the road is very dark due to how densely packed these trees are. At night, it was pitch black. I've never had any issues driving back at night from her house, save for a few times a skunk or a raccoon has scurried across the road. A 1/4 mile into the canopy, I saw something that looked off. I got a weird vibe from it. Not necessarily a run gut feeling, but the feeling you get when your brain is struggling to process something is just way beyond its pay grade. At first I justified what I was looking at, and thought it looked weird because it was dark out, and it was just a deer facing away from me at a peculiar angle. I guess reality gave me a swift kick to the head when I realized I was looking at a very large coyote standing on its hind legs, hunched over slightly, looking at me. Not at the car, not at the headlights, but right at me. Standing, this thing was easily 6 or 7 feet tall. It looked very off, not because of the posture or because of the height, which certainly added to the weirdness factor, but because its face looked very humanoid, like it had facial expressions you'd recognize in humans, not in dogs, and certainly not in giant coyotes. I swear, I have absolutely no idea what came over me in this instance, but I took my foot off the gas. I was going about 40 miles per hour, almost like this thing had caught me in a trance, like my brain shut off because it was way too much, and I was beyond overwhelmed with seeing something that didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't. I slowed down as I got really close to the thing, dangerously so, and, mind you, it was standing probably 5 feet, at the very most, from the side of the road, and maybe 6 feet from my car, so going slow was not a good idea, because it easily could have just jumped out at me and my rolled down passenger window. But here I was, slowly crawling up to this thing like I was about to ask it if it needed a lift. I think I was about 6 feet away from it before my brain finally kicked back on like Windows 95 rebooting, and everything blinked back into existence. My foot slammed that gas pedal. My tires were spinning out for a second and my car lurched forward and took off like a bullet. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and I had no idea if I was holding my breath the whole time because I was suddenly gasping for air. The air was oddly charged. It smelled musty and metallic and had a weird staticky feeling to it all at once. I never once felt that sensation since that night. I looked back once after my car had sped forward to make sure it wasn't following me, but it stayed standing there, somewhat lit up by the red glow of my taillights, and it was still looking at me. This time the humanoid face didn't look very human anymore, and instead looked very much like a coyote. For a minute, I was strongly questioning my own sense of reality, if I had really seen what I thought I had seen, but it stood there, frighteningly tall and still remained on its hind legs. I've read somewhere, and don't ask where, that Wendigos or skinwalkers can show that they're not animals, not human either, when they're going to take someone. Maybe to instill fear. Maybe because they know others will have the same reaction I did when their brain fails to process and their body freezes up, struggling to truly understand what it just isn't meant to. I don't really know what I saw that night. I just know that I didn't see a normal coyote, and I didn't see a weird furry guy dressed in faux fur standing on the side of the road past midnight in rural Massachusetts. Not that they wouldn't. I don't know what they're about. I've seen a lot of shit, weird shit, in the woods surrounding my town. I've experienced paranormal things. Not ooh, ah, spooky ghost type of stuff. But there are things that exist deep in the woods where people don't go that are beyond human comprehension. There are strange things that live out there, and I just happened to see something. Not saying that I know what, but I saw something that didn't make sense. Something abnormal. Something that scared me. Every single year, my family and I would go to our bach located in literally the middle of nowhere. completely 100% isolated. To get to the location, we first have to drive 4.5 hours north into the country. Then there is a 25-mile gravel road in which takes you past different forest areas, abandoned century-old farmhouses, and bare untouched land. The area in which the batch is located used to be a part of a bustling town in the mid-1700s, full of fish and dairy factories, a school, hotel, and other things before it was abandoned in the early 1900s. The town had a dark history. Firstly, a bunch of school kids playing on the main wharf drowned because the rotten bridge had collapsed under them. Secondly, the daughter of the hotel owner suffered serious mental health issues and drowned her infant baby brother before she hung herself. Lastly, a 17-year-old male, we'll call him John, also suffered from an array of mental health disabilities, including severe schizophrenia and bipolar. John's poor mental health had apparently resulted in him persuading a dozen local children to come and play on the beach, where he had said a bonfire had been set up. He then proceeded to shoot 11 children and beat the final child to death by bashing his head in with a piece of driftwood. There are people who dismiss this event as bullshit, and there isn't much historical evidence or records on it, but many people believe it is very true, and after me and my family experienced what we did, we believe it to be authentic. My grandfather first bought the property to store his boat, but we started camping down there, which resulted in turning the boat shed into a batch and a yearly tradition. He was unaware of the history up until 10 years after he bought the property. Knowing this history didn't really seem to affect us. We still enjoyed going there every year. It was 2013. My family and I were there for our yearly exclusion from civilization, enjoying the summer, good food, and just spending time with each other. Before I go any further, I'd like to say that I've been going to this place ever since I was born because it's been in my family for 40 years. I'm now 19. It was our final night there, and we were all in the main living room area telling scary stories and reminiscing of old times spent there. At about 2:30 a.m., I awoke to the sound of feet running in the sand outside of the batch. The batch is literally on the beach, so much so that when the tide comes in, the water is practically under the batch, so all you can hear is the gentle waves and sounds from the country night. It sounded like someone was running up and down on our batch. I first thought it was my father coming back from floundering, but soon realized he was sleeping in the bunk to the left of me. I just sat there listening for about 2 minutes before I awoke my dad to listen with me. As I woke my dad, the sound of the running stopped. I told my dad about it, and he said it must have just been some kind of animal. I fell asleep after about 10 minutes, only to be awoken 30 minutes later by the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a lot of deep inhuman growls coming from underneath the batch. The growls awoke my whole family, so we sat up and listened until they stopped. I'll never forget my dad's face. He looked so terrified, which is unusual because he's so bloody macho. We would usually go get him to inspect something like this, but we didn't want anyone leaving. About several minutes passed before the growling came to a complete stop. We sat there in shock trying to figure out what it was, even though I knew it wasn't anything remotely human. I would like to also add, up until this point I didn't believe in the paranormal. We dismissed it as some kind of animal, and all eventually fell back to sleep. But I was awoken again about an hour later with the feeling that someone or something was staring at me. It's hard to explain, but it felt like this immense thick energy in my surroundings. I remember being all sweaty because I had my head in my sleeping bag in 80-degree heat, refusing to look around me. This lasted for about 10 minutes before the curiosity got the better of me, and I just looked around the room. I put my head up, and what I saw will never leave my mind. Makes me ill just thinking of it. Near the back door of the batch there is a large window located next to it, which overlooks a small deck. There was a large, hooded black figure, very still, just standing there. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of what looked like something, or someone, draped in black clothing. It would have had to have been at least 6'7" to 7 foot tall to reach the high position it was in. I felt paralyzed, and just stared back at it for at least 2 minutes, before a loud, deep growl came from the direction of the figure. It woke my family, so I jumped up out of my sleeping bag, and while I wasn't looking at it, it disappeared. I gathered myself almost in tears from fear to tell my family what I had just seen. We didn't go back to sleep because of what we had witnessed, and because I was in a shocking state from my anxiety. The next day my uncle came to visit. I told him what happened the night before, and he revealed something that still fucks me up to this day. He said that the land the batch was built on belonged to the mother of John. She had apparently had several satanic rituals in her home and had severely abused John, which had probably resulted in his mental health issues. My uncle said he knew this because his friend, who was a priest near the old town, had relatives who passed down this information. He said he didn't believe it, so he didn't bother to mention it to any of us, fearing it would make us not want to visit anymore. But I can say confidently that we now see it as the truth. Thankfully, my uncle got his friend, the priest, to bless the property short after. I don't know why any paranormal activity just occurred that one time, when it could have happened during the 40 years my family had been going there. Also, despite that emotionally scarring event, we still visit every year. The days there are beautiful in the summer, but in the evenings I am always hoping and praying that me or my family doesn't experience anything similar to that event. My father served in the military and descended from a Native American tribe from up north. He was a survivalist and a complete sociopath that forced his sons into intense survival scenarios, and then left us for weeks on end to see if we'd survive. I've seen some truly disturbing things on these camping trips, and some things in less stressful settings. I was 11, and I had just moved back to America less than a week before. My family had decided to take a short road trip up to Maine to visit some family when we went off course. Being 11, and naive enough to think that I would actually make it to Maine before my father did anything stupid, I didn't pay attention to where he pulled off onto a back road. To this day, I don't know where I was dropped off, just that I was in some dense forested area. I think it was in New York, but I can't say for certain. I was kicked out of the car, handed a canteen, my bow, my compass, my quiver, and my knife. I was told that he'd be back to pick me up after visiting family, and I'd have 15 days out there. I did the basic survival stuff, found drinkable water, built a shelter, plotted out a rough map of the area in my head, all that stuff. It was my third or fourth night there when I heard what sounded like a woman screaming. Since mountain lions don't come out this far east, and bears were easy to scare away if it was one, I figured I'd go investigate, in case it was an injured hiker or something. After following the sound, all that I could find was a squirrel that was partially eaten. Since the screaming had stopped, I figured that someone had been hiking and came across those, but had left after calming down. So I went back to my shelter and settled in for the night. After that, the screaming became a nightly occurrence, and after the third night of not finding anything aside from the evidence of a predator in the area, I decided to play it safe and stay in my shelter at night. 2 days before my family would be back, I woke up in the middle of the night to screaming right outside my shelter. I jumped up, bow in hand, my knife and arrow in the other. What I saw terrified me. It was about the size of a dog, but shaped like a deer. It had a very humanoid face, and was covered in dull, dark scales. I panicked and shot it in the chest. It began hissing and wheezing as it ran off into the trees. I had thought about following it and killing it, but when I looked at its tracks, I saw something that convinced me otherwise. The creature's hind legs left behind the tracks of a small deer. The front legs, however, left the tracks you'd see from a person walking on their hands like a gorilla, only the fingers ended with sharp claw marks scratching up the earth while it moved. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night, and the following morning I dug several holes around my camp, filled them with sharpened stakes, and covered them. I also did my squirrel hunting and harvested berries as fast as I could once my defenses were up, so that I wouldn't have to worry about losing my strength if that thing came back. It didn't that night, not like I got any sleep anyway. In the morning, I just carved a simple warning into the trees around my camp that said, "Danger, traps," and left. I didn't let go of my bow until after I was picked up and we had been driving over an hour. I honestly don't know what I saw, or if the lights had been playing tricks on me, but I know that I did hear a screaming sound, and I know what I saw in the tracks of the creature. Around last October, I had been hanging out at my house with my 11-year-old sister, Danielle, or Danny, who was very mature for her age, might I add, and my good friend Clara. Clara and I were both 15 at the time, and the three of us decided to go for a walk at around 1 in the morning. Here's some information about the area I live in. I live on the border of Macomb County and St. Clair County in Michigan. I live in a township surrounded by lots of trees and fields. I'm a short girl, standing at 5'2.5". That half is important to me. Considered more of a weakling, and not very threatening due to being considered cute, but I take on a different persona when I go on walks like this, or really whenever my safety or the safety of a loved one is in jeopardy. When Danny, Clara, and I went out, we dressed for stealth because we had originally planned to mess with the neighbor kid. It was a warmer night for October, and the moon was almost full, and it was very, very foggy, and it kinda set a theme of horror. You really couldn't see that far in front of you, maybe 10 feet. I remember we had joked about how we all looked like murderers, especially me, and even more so when I stood in a distance due to the fog. I had been dressed in a dark red flannel with a hood, which I wore up. This is what mainly gave me the appearance of being trouble, but what really sold it was that I had a dagger with me. I might be a small 15-year-old girl, but I always bring my dagger with me whenever I go on these walks and hide it in my clothes. At my own house, I also have a sword and 3 other different sized katanas in my room that I'm ready to use just in case of trouble. Anyone who thought they could come mess with me would be met with a sharp surprise. Besides this, on my walks I make it a point to glare menacingly into cars as they approached. But this story doesn't have a creepy encounter with a sketchy human. No, it was something completely different. At the time, Danny, Clara, and I had been walking for a while, and we were now on a road across from my own which was completely engulfed in woods. I was having fun with them, but I was also on high alert, as I was in protective and survival mode. I've always been this way. Even as a kid, I was suspicious of everything, and it's gotten me out of a lot of bad situations that could have gone horribly wrong. The 2 of them kept giving me shit for bringing my dagger, but I kept telling them that it was better to have one than to not, as you never know what could happen to 3 young girls on a backcountry road in the middle of the night. We were just reaching a bridge in the road, and on the left side of us, right after the bridge, there was a cabin-like home that was rather large and really nice. I was excited for them to see it, as it reminded me of a cabin in the woods type of house that looked like a perfect setup of a horror movie. As we were walking past it, I looked over to the left of me and my eyes caught something in the brush. Before the tree started on this side, there was a bit of bushes and bramble, and, in the middle of it all, was a white-colored humanoid-looking creature. I stared at it as we walked, trying to decide if it was actually something, or possibly just a tree stump, as it wasn't moving at all. Just as I was about to dismiss it, Clara suddenly said, "Oh, hell no." I looked over and saw her staring right at it. "You see it too?" I said, getting nervous, and she said yes, and at this point all 3 of us were looking at this thing as we booked it down the road. We wondered about it for a while, and were nervous about going back as we would have to pass that area again. When we were heading back, in the area right before the location we saw it in, Clara and Danny saw it in front of us, just standing creepily on the left side of the road. We calmly kept pressing forward on the opposite side of the road, but then it disappeared and reappeared in the middle of the road about 15 to 20 feet in front of us. At this point we were freaking out a lot, but kept walking. As we were about 10 feet from it, it disappeared once again. At this point we were very spooked, and I was ready to use my dagger if I had to. Clara all of a sudden was pulling out her phone and said, "I got this," and turned on a Little John song which highly lightened the mood. Clara's that type of person who can always turn a bad situation into a funny, or less frightening one, and I love her for that. As we passed the part where we had originally seen the creature, there was no longer a white thing in the spot where it had been, only confirming that it had indeed been real. We played Little John and 5 Seconds of Summer for a little bit to calm our nerves. It really didn't help that a little more up the road there was a crow that had been there since we last passed by, that was crowing non-stop. It seriously gave a dreadful vibe and a feeling of death. When we arrived at my house, we decided we hadn't gone on a long enough adventure, and walked on past it. What happens next? I don't know if it had anything to do with the creature, but it was still creepy nonetheless. To the left of my house I had a neighbor, and across from him was another, and after both of these houses were fields and trees. We decided to sneak into the backyard of the house across from my next door neighbor, as this house for some reason had a gated backyard that backed up to the trees. Living in the country, having a fenced backyard just isn't something you see. Clara and I had been in this backyard the previous summer when the house was abandoned. It was fun to creep around in. We were making our way to the side of the house where there was no fence, making sure to be very sneaky and staying hidden in the shadows. These are the only people on my road I don't know, and I didn't have a good feeling about them. When we were coming up by their car, there was suddenly a huge slap on the back of their window. It sounded like either a rock had been thrown at it, or someone banged on it hard with their hand. Either way, it shocked us, and we booked it to my house as we were afraid we were going to be caught. I'm not sure if it could have been the creature, if it had followed us, because it being a person just didn't make any sense for the situation that it had been. As for the creature though, I'm almost positive it was the same thing Danny had seen summer 2014 outside of her window. A reason it haunts me so much is because it strongly resembles the rake. In fact, I'm almost completely positive it had been the rake, because it looked very similar. That, and it also looked like one of those creepypastas called Bob. But either way, it was very creepy, and I hope to never see it again. But I can't help but wonder if it stalks my house some nights, just waiting for an opportunity to strike. The incident I'm about to relate happened some 50 years ago. I was visiting my grandparents who lived in an old farmhouse in central Pennsylvania. My cousin Dee was there as well. We rose really early each morning, as was the practice when visiting there. At Grandma's, those that didn't get out of the house before breakfast got a chores list that would take all morning. Dee and I were determined to avoid that list. The house stood on top of a hill, and was some distance from the road, with a long driveway leading up to a car parking area. The ground on either side of the driveway could be best classified as an unattended meadow with corpses of trees sporadically scattered throughout. From the car park in front of the house, you could look down and out towards the road some 500 yards away. This is where Dee and I stood that morning. There was a small stand of pine trees about halfway down the hill. These were young trees, not more than 9 feet tall. We knew these trees well, as they were impediment to every high roll or sled roll we ever attempted down that slope. That morning, however, we never even got to start the downhill fun. "What the hell was that?" one of us asked. "Beats the hell out of me," the other answered. Under the nearest pine tree there was a figure. It appeared to be made out of golden metal, which glittered in the sunlight. It was about 3 foot tall, as best we could determine from our uphill angle. From the shoulders down, it seemed to be wrapped or swaddled in golden cloth. This covered the entire length of the creature, making it look as though it was in a form-fitted sleeping bag. On its head was a helmet, or headdress, also gold. When we first saw it, it was facing to our left, so we were looking at its golden left profile. The sight of this thing made us both freeze in place, barely breathing. We stared down at it for a time-distorted period. A minute? Suddenly, the thing changed its head. It did not turn its head. It had been looking straight ahead, at some spot to our left. Then it was looking directly at us. The head did not move through all the intermediate positions. The transformation was instant. But then, a wave of dread and terror rolled over the two of us. I've never before, or since, felt anything so intensely alien or malignant. It hated us. Neither of us were the most athletic of kids, but I beat Dee over the fence by a good 4 feet. Apparently we burst into the kitchen babbling incoherently about a golden boy down the hill. It took us a good half hour to convince my grandpa that there was really something worth seeing if he went out with us. And of course, there wasn't. Nothing on the ground, nothing in the tree. But that image of the golden boy, with the most intense hatred in his gaze, that will never go away. Last year, Dee and I reunited for the first time in 30 years. It wasn't 5 minutes before he turned to me, absolute level gaze, and solemnly asked, "Did you really see Goldie?" Goldie was the name the family used to refer to the thing over the years. Just as seriously and solemnly, I nodded, adding, "I always wondered if you were just going along with me." "Nope, I saw it." I hugged him as hard as I could, feeling him relax. Goldie was real. We could both stop wondering and put this 50-year-old mystery to bed, where hopefully Goldie will never take up residence. No one needs a gold monster under the bed. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to gain early access to my content, as well as some other cool perks, make sure you go check out my Patreon page. It's a cool way for you to get some cool perks as well as support the channel. I appreciate everyone checking out this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.